Hello, everybody. Tracy, Mrs. JDog Flanagan with you here today. I'm the co-founder and senior vice president here at JDog Brands. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Tactical Treasures podcast powered by JDog and Vet TV. Our podcast gives veterans, MilSpouses, active military members, and military family members a voice in the veteran space to speak about their service, how they're affecting their communities post-service, and they share with me a tactical treasure that has helped them in their journey in their military career, business, or life. Today, I am so pleased to have with us Brandi Mitchell, who is a U.S. Air Force MilSpouse with her husband having served for 22 years. And for a combined 12 years, Brandi served as a special agent with the National Background Investigations Bureau and as an independent contract investigator with Peraton. After leaving federal service to focus on her family, Brandi began her healing journey of sexual assault. And it was during this healing that she began to learn all facets of human trafficking. Brandi attended child exploitation courses, worked part-time at a safe home for minor victims of sex trafficking, and volunteered with other human trafficking organizations. Then in 2022, Brandi founded the 501c3 nonprofit Shadows of Strength, which combats human trafficking through collections, identification, and the rebuilding of victims' lives. Brandi, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You're a MilSpouse and your husband, 22-year Air Force veteran. Thank you for your service, ma'am, and your husband's service. Could you talk to us about how you and your husband first met, about his military service and your experience as a MilSpouse?
Yes, we met almost 23 years as of next month. 23 years ago, and he was working part-time at a restaurant in Winter Robins, Georgia, and he was still active duty at the time, and he was working there, and I came in and was studying on a Sunday before I had to go back to college, and we just hit it off, and we continued a relationship as I went back to school, and eventually we moved in together and moved to Arkansas, Little Rock, where we were stationed at Little Rock Air Force Base. And he became a C-130 flight engineer. And during that time, I was working as a waitress at a couple of the restaurants downtown and hadn't finished my degree yet, just found that I wasn't quite ready. And then we eventually got married, which was a surprise to me because we actually did not think we would ever get married, but we wanted to live together. And he surprised me one day, and we were in Memphis, and he just said, "Will you marry me?" And it shocked me. I won't repeat what I said to him. I just basically told him to shut the F up. And next thing I know, I turn around, and he's got a tear coming out of his eye. And for once, I'm going, "Wow, you actually mean this. Okay." And then we got orders to move to Germany about a year after he proposed. And when we had planned the wedding, we did not know we were getting orders to Germany at that point. So also that was also right when deployment started happening. So he started deploying in October, right before it officially kicked off. And I ended up in a really bad car accident at that point. And he said, "I'm never leaving you again without having that ring on your finger." And we went down to the courthouse, even though we had our wedding actually set. And then a year later, did not realize it was the actual date, just by one day of when we got married originally. And he actually recalled the date we got married, not myself.
Oh, wow.
I thought it was later on. And so then shortly after we got married, we ended up moving to Germany, to Ramstein, after we had our big family wedding. And it was at that point where we stayed for about 6 years. And during that time, I ended up getting my degree in psychology. And at that moment, I had a professor who sat me down. We were getting ready to move back, PCS back to the States. And he said, "I need to talk to you after class." And I said, "Okay." And we sat down, and he said, "What happened to you?"
Oh.
And I've never had anyone actually ask me that question in that way. I've had other individuals, teachers, ask me how I was doing. And looking back, I think they were trying to figure out something was going on, but they weren't asking it the correct way. Because when you ask that question, how are you? I'm thinking, I'm great today. The sky's blue, sunny. But this professor sat me down. He asked me that question, and I asked him, why are you asking me this? And he said, because every research paper you have written in my class, and I also went to your other professors and asked them, has something to do with how sex is used in war, how sex is used in the media, how victims of trafficking are affected. And I've never had a student write so much about that. And at that moment, I just broke down. I didn't really know this man. He was my professor a couple of times, but because of how he asked it, it was the first time I ever really truly told my story. And my husband knew some of it. I didn't want to tell him a lot of it. So it was the first time I ever told my story to anyone. My husband knew a little bit, but other than that, no one really knew because I was so scared to say anything because I had already had my voice silenced back in high school. Wow. And when I actually confronted and said, this person raped me, and I basically got told by a teacher, well, let's just not talk about this. And that's a whole nother story we can get into.
Right.
But it was the first time I actually felt like somebody wanted to hear it and they could see something was wrong. Sure. And before I left, he said, have you ever thought about joining the military? And I said, absolutely not. I do not want to join it. Every male in my family has been in the military. It just wasn't for me. And he said, what about national security? I never even thought about that. Right. And it just kind of stuck to me. And I thought, well, maybe. And he goes, but I want to tell you before you leave here, I don't know how and I don't know when, but you're going to make a difference in this world. And I froze because about 8 years prior, the last attempt of rape, and it was by a boyfriend of mine, I left his house and I was driving my vehicle down this mountain road between South Carolina and North Georgia. And I was trying to get back to the school. And I'd ran out of his home with the incident that had occurred, and it was raining, it was at night, and my 92 Chrysler LeBaron convertible spun out of control, and no one was on that mountain road, thank God, and I'm sitting sideways, and I'm looking over this mountain range. Oh, no. And I just started crying, and I said, dear God, I don't know why I keep getting myself put into this situation. I wasn't really connecting a lot of the things that had happened to me in my life for why I was doing the things that I was doing. Right. And I said, please just help me, guide me out of this, because I don't know how and I don't know when, but I'll make a difference in this world. So to hear that almost 7 to 8 years later, right, it just shocked me. Wow. So we ended up coming back to the States about 6 months later and had received my degree, and I got on USA Jobs. And I just started searching, and I saw a background investigator position, and I thought, no, I want to do something with psychology. So right. I skipped it, and it ended up being the last position that I went to go apply for. Right. And about not even a month later, I get a call, and from the area chief. The special agent in charge, he said, I really want to talk to you about your resume. Can we make an appointment? And she was an amazing woman, Mary Anderson. She was just a beautiful soul. And being a military spouse, it was so hard to find work because one thing that we're finding is, right, well, you're about to PCS. And she asked me at the end of the interview, she said, is there anything else that you would like to tell me that's something special about you? And I said, I just need someone to trust me. I need someone to give me a chance to have work. I want to work. I've received this degree. I've come a long way in my life. I just need someone to say yes. And she got up and she said, I'm also a military spouse and I understand. Not even a week later, I got the position. And she had also asked me what I really wanted later on in the future. What are my long-term goals? And I said, I really want to work counterintelligence. Next thing I knew, after I went through training, which is about 6 months, I ended up getting a lot of counterintel cases. She said, I'm grooming you to work counterintelligence. And I did that for 8 years. I went overseas quite a bit to the different military locations, also stateside TDYs. And I worked a lot of foreign state actor cases, for financial issues, and then developing cases on individuals who committed crimes against children.
Right.
And that's when it really stuck to me, going, why are these people in these positions and this is happening? But I've been able to get them to talk to me. And I started talking to my husband and I said, I really think there's more that I'm supposed to be doing. Well, I didn't continue at that point. I just kept working and ended up, my husband retired from the military. And when he retired, we're now living in Florida at Hurlburt Air Force Base. And he would come into my office just, hey, do you want to go boating? No, honey, I have to work. So he had a big transition issue of,
right, sure.
Well, I'm not going to work, but you want to go boating. The water's like glass.
Right.
And I didn't see much of an issue at that point with him when it came to PTS. We just kind of moved on about our lives. We ended up moving to, after he retired, we ended up moving to Tennessee, just south of Nashville. And I ended up transferring to the Clarksville field office at that point, continued the counter intel cases, TDYing, going overseas. And I started noticing a difference in my husband. And that was, he was working a regular civilian job.
Right.
He was a supervisor. Other supervisors who were veterans were getting hired. They're having to learn how to communicate with civilians and not military. Yeah. So there was a lot of that transition.
Sure.
And I started noticing a difference. He wasn't feeling fulfilled. Here's his wife now, who he says he's supporting, and he wants her to succeed. I'm a GS-12 at this point, and he's now sitting at home. And I could tell it was really bothering him. And it wasn't, and I knew it wasn't me, it was him.
Right.
Because we've been through deployments since day one, and we've never known what it's like to live with each other for a full year.
Right. Oh, wow.
So that was, after he retired, was really our first true knowing how to live together. But I was still going TDY, thinking that would help and continue that, just because that's what we know.
Right.
And I started realizing, was he having PTS issues, but I didn't really know what PTS was.
Right.
And we talked, and he said, I miss deploying. So I said, okay, if this is what you want to do. We were trying for a baby. We didn't want a baby for the longest time. Did not want a child. Something happened after his retirement. We said, let's try having a baby. But it'd been about 3 years we weren't having one. And he said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and start deploying. So he started deploying as a contractor, which seemed to help. But he was going for 2 months home, 2 months gone, 2 months home.
Yeah.
But I was also noticing when he was coming home, he was drinking a lot more and staying on the couch for 2 or 3 weeks at a time.
Right.
And I was just kind of letting him be and let him relax. I don't know what's going on. Well, eventually I ended up pregnant in 2017, and he still continued to deploy. We ended up moving back to Florida because we missed our military family.
Right.
We didn't really know what it was like to live amongst civilians, so that was different for us. And it's no offense to them. It's just the life we've been living for 22 years.
Sure.
So I also noticed during that time when he was supposed to be coming home, he wasn't coming home. He was getting drunk in Dubai, and it was taking him a while to get back. And that wasn't like him. And so finally he would come back home, and then he was also part of a motorcycle club, which he's no longer a part of. But they were always going out and drinking, and I try to reach out to them. I think something's going on. He's getting on his bike. He's drinking a lot. It's getting dangerous. I don't know what's happening.
Sure.
I think this might be PTS. What do? Let's go have a beer. So at that point, I had had enough. Our son was 3 or so at the time. And he finally got out of the club because he started realizing this isn't the best thing for him. But the drinking started continuing. He wasn't sleeping at night. He was getting up during the night. He was sitting and watching TV. He wasn't coming out of the bed. Finally, with some close friends, we were able to get him into Warrior's Heart out in Texas. And he went through their program where he also received a service dog, and he actually helped train him.
Right.
And he came home and he was good for several months, and then it crept back in, which I was also told that happens that first year.
Sure. Sure.
Well, things started really getting bad. He ended up going back to Warrior's Heart, came back. That didn't last long. In fact, he started drinking on his way home. And I didn't know what else to do. Finally, he found a counselor that he really enjoyed, and he stayed sober for about 4 months. And during this time, I was also building Shadows of Strength.
Okay.
I was in my office at my home, and I just looked at him and I said, I feel like there's more I need to do. It was during 2020, and he said, you're about to start this organization, aren't you? And I said, I am. So I reached out to the Secret Place home where I worked part-time for just a short time. And the executive director at that time, Alicia, her and I really sat down, and I just said, listen, I think what y'all are doing is great for these survivors, but I'm an investigator, and this is really where my heart needs to be.
Right.
And we sat down, we looked at where this gap was. And that gap was between law enforcement and survivors.
Right.
And they didn't want to go to law enforcement because either they were scared or they've been and they weren't believed.
Right.
So I started learning and researching and taking classes. And I also noticed at this time my husband was getting involved, and it seemed to be helping him getting that mission back, that sense of service.
Right.
So as I was trying to build it, I thought, how can I help veterans as well get that sense of service back? Unfortunately for him, he wasn't quite there in his recovery. So I actually had to ask him, please step aside until your recovery is good.
Right.
Because it still kept triggering things. And for his portion of it, he is now sober. He's been through another program. It seems to really work. He is now on medication, which he said, I should have done this 4 years ago. Because most veterans will not do that.
Sure.
And I'm super proud of him. But going back to the SOS, during that time, he really stepped up and started supporting me because there were times I didn't feel supported. But that was his PTS. And I'm also going through my own PTS healing.
Sure. Yeah.
So for 3 years, there was this tension and not knowing really what to do. There was a lot of tears in my pillow regarding, do I keep doing Shadows of Strength? Do I keep my marriage? What do I do? Luckily for me, I have a great support system of wonderful women who just stood by me, and they said, Brady, you got this. A group of men who also helped my husband, just some amazing people, and they stepped up and they helped us out because they said, you guys are not going anywhere. You are not separating. We're going to make this work.
Oh, wow. That's great.
So I think if we hadn't had that support,
sure,
we would not have been able to get to where we are today.
Yeah. That's
but
really
as far
great.
as Shadows of Strength, again, I started it based off of my story, and I wanted to take my 13 years of doing investigations on a national security level and also provide that sense of service to veterans who are in the right mental state. But we also are providing a counseling service for our team members to make sure they're on that right path. And we investigate network cells. So we really go after the traffickers, those that are committing crimes against our survivors and victims. We're believing the stories of the victims. We take their story, we vet that information, and we partner with law enforcement and other federal agencies, and we bring the case to them and say, hey, this is what we have. What else do you need from us to take it over or to prosecute? And it seems to be working really well. The survivors are going through victim advocates to us. So that way the trauma-informed care is still there. We're not triggering them in certain ways because we are talking about their story. We also allow survivors to come to us directly, but knowing that we are not a mental health care group for that. We are literally investigative. And I am proud to say that this last year has been an incredible journey. Like I said, a lot of tears, a lot of anger, a lot of screaming, bringing people on that I thought I trusted and then couldn't trust, which breaks me even more because of my own story.
Sure.
But I have brought on some beautiful women who are now on my board. We are a female-ran board. And
Wow.
they have
Congratulations.
thank you. And we have our director of security. She has a beautiful background. She's an Army veteran, retired first sergeant with a law enforcement background. She's worked rape and sexual assault cases.
Oh,
So
wow.
she's able to also think of like a defense attorney. How do we not get the case compromised?
Sure.
Um, we have our director of emergency protection. She's got a background in executive protection. And our COO, she's got a business background. And our director of intel has an intelligence background, and she is also a veteran.
Wow, that's amazing. So, wow, it sounds like you've had quite the journey. What an amazing story. Hello, viewers and listeners. I would like to introduce you to the JDog Foundation, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the prevention of veteran suicide and the healing of veterans' mental health. 100% of all proceeds received by the JDog Foundation goes directly to several foundations focused on the mission of saving veterans' lives. Each partner is hand-selected by our executive director, Jerry Flanagan, with input from the assistant director, Tracy Flanagan, and the JDog Foundation board members. Our foundation's motto: saving lives, one veteran at a time. Go to jdogfoundation.org to take a look at everything that we're doing there and the organizations that we're partnered with. You can also donate, and there's also a support line if you're in need of help. Thanks. Check us out, jdogfoundation.org. How can people help support the cause and missions and your mission at SOS? And being somebody who may not understand human trafficking or be in that space where you are, how would you recognize something like that and be able to be helpful? Or what would you do in a situation like that? I know that's kind of a loaded question, but.
No, actually, I'm glad you asked that, because one thing that we're finding is people are now coming to us recently because they want to knock down doors. How do we help these kids? I want to knock down doors. Well, that's not what we do. And what we do is we provide that investigative background. And if you're wanting to help organizations combat human trafficking, and if you don't have the experience or the knowledge, the best way is to really donate, whether it's monetary or even hygiene products. So we are even asking for hygiene products because we give hygiene bags to our survivors because just to get tampons, I mean, it's hard for them.
Right.
To include down to electronics that we could use. That is really the biggest thing, I think, right now for most organizations, is the donation, and allow us, organizations that know how to combat this, to do our job with your support.
Right.
If you have that background, definitely reach out to your organizations, send your resume if this is something, but also understand there is going to be a huge vetting process. And if that organization doesn't have that, I would walk away.
Right.
That is one of our biggest things, and we have our people that can do that. As far as what human trafficking looks like, it can look like different many things. Most of us think of the movie Taken, now the new Sound of Freedom, the international side, someone in the basement tied up. What we see mostly here in the United States and even in the Panhandle is what's called familial trafficking. So it's parents trafficking their own children,
Oh my
brothers,
gosh.
sisters. It's friends in the high school recruiting those victims as well. Some of these parents may have been in the life, or they've had a drug debt that they need to pay back to their dealer. And now I have my 13-year-old. So we
Oh my
see a
gosh.
lot of
Terrible.
the 13, 14-year age range here. The other part of this is anyone under the age of 18, law enforcement and prosecutors do not have to find the coercion, force, or fraud. They do not have to prove that. Anyone over the age of 18, they have to prove force, fraud, and coercion. So a lot of organizations really go after the underage, which is understandable because it's a lot easier to prosecute. The
Sure.
problem is that these kids who have gotten involved with the life at 16, 17, who haven't been rescued or have not been given the services, now they've turned 18. And a lot of them won't help them. So we're looking at that 18 to 24 age. Their
Wow.
brains still haven't fully developed, but
Sure.
we have to prove that. So our organization is definitely also looking at that group of victims
Wow.
to help them, because at that point they don't feel like they can go into anyone, because
Right.
not law enforcement, excuse me, just in general, it's just hard to prove that. They want to help, but it's really having to dig in and find that force, fraud, and coercion.
Right. Right. Yeah, of course. Um, this has been what an amazing conversation and a lot of knowledge that you've just shared with us. Thank you so much. Hello, viewers and listeners. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Tactical Treasures podcast. We are currently speaking with Brandi Mitchell, who is a U.S. Air Force MilSpouse, with her husband having served for 22 years. And for a combined 12 years, Brandi served as a special agent with the National Background Investigations Bureau. Now, she and her husband have co-founded Shadows of Strength, which is a veteran-based 501c3 nonprofit combating human trafficking by bringing highly skilled counterintelligence to the forefront of the operation. Shadows of Strength has a diversity of programs to combat trafficking, ranging from counterintelligence, an investigative approach, and intelligence gathering efforts focused on the idea that survivors and witnesses, especially those underage, come first, and the need to just listen and believe them is what is most important. To learn more about Shadows of Strength and the effort against human trafficking, go to shadowsofstrength.org. Now back to the podcast. Let's dive into your tactical treasure.
Okay.
I would love to hear what you're going to share with us today. Is there something that has helped you in your journey along the way?
Yes, thank you. I would definitely have to say the support of friends, for my closest girlfriends. They have been literally my treasure pieces.
Oh,
If it
wow.
wasn't, I'm hoping I'm not going to cry. If it wasn't for them, I would be completely lost. They have been so supportive. One of them is a veteran herself, 22 years EOD. Another one, she's worked intelligence. And then my COO, they have just, I've called them up at 2:00 in the morning crying, and they've answered that phone.
Oh,
But it's
wow.
not just one way. We also give back to each other. And if it wasn't for like I said, if it wasn't for them, I don't know where I'd be right now.
Wow.
They've
Well,
pushed me when I've said, I
yeah,
don't know if I can do SOS. They're like, no, girl, you're doing this. And they were the
yeah.
first ones I've ever told my full story to, excluding my husband.
Oh,
So
wow. Wow. Well, that is really special. And I think that makes all the difference, I think, in our lives, is to have that support system, whatever it looks like. The people that can push us when we need to be pushed, and be there when we need a shoulder to cry on. It's really important. That's very, very special treasure.
and I just want spouses to know, military families to know, that they're not alone. And
Right.
if you feel like something's not right in your veteran, there are those of us that have been there. And as a military spouse, you can work and you can make a difference. It's just
Yes.
finding that time, and it may not happen right away. It might happen 14 years later.
Right.
But
Right.
I just want the spouses and families to know that there are those of us that have gone through this struggle. We know what it looks like,
Yeah.
to the point where we've seen the bottom and the darkest places of our veterans, to where
Right.
that Mission 22 really needs to come into play.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I've spoken with a lot of mill spouses, and they've all kind of said the same thing. They've all been there with their veteran, that has transitioned out. Um, and you ladies are absolutely amazing, what you deal with, and how you help your veteran spouse. get through some of those dark times. Um, if if you could have people listening to this podcast kind of take away just one thing from the conversation that we've had about human trafficking, what would that be?
This isn't taken. Don't be a hero.
Right.
The survivors don't need heroes. What they need is people to listen and to hear them and to believe them. If you want to be a hero and you think you're going to snatch them right off the street or break into that house, ask yourself, what are you going to do with them afterwards? Are you sure that their child is not in the house next to them that's being held to make sure she's working? There's organizations out here that know how to work that. But I think definitely do not be a hero. Just be there for them, listen to them, support the organizations that can handle this. And that trafficking isn't just being handcuffed in that basement. These survivors, these victims are walking around, they're going to the grocery store. They may look like normal people. Please do not think that they just want to be in this life. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So I think that is the biggest thing. It's just to really reach out to those organizations, figure out how to help them, and also educate yourself. And there's many organizations, and including ourselves, that we're willing to give that education on what it looks like for the United States.
Wow. That's great advice. Yeah. You may not really think about it. And I just myself, I've heard about it, but as I've been preparing for this podcast and this conversation with you, I've been sort of trying to educate myself and you're right. It's not always that person locked in the basement. It could be just a normal person that, you're right, is just living amongst us, and you never know what's going on in their personal life. And it could be, trafficking. So great advice. And do you have any other little nugget or takeaway for your fellow MilSpouses?
You're strong, you're beautiful, and reach out. Don't be shy. I know it's easier said than done. Especially our veterans won't reach out. So when people ask the veterans to reach out, they're just not going to do it. We're in a dark place. I know spouses are also scared to reach out because they're afraid something might happen to their career. But if you can reach out to those spouses, please do. I know there's a whole thing about the hardest military spouse is the hardest job in the military. I know a lot of people don't like that. But in all honesty, when you really think about it, they're the ones who see them cry. They're the ones who are putting up, I don't want to say putting up, they're the ones who are seeing the PTS. They're seeing that dark place of suicide. They're seeing that and they're feeling alone. Right. Believe them just like you're going to believe a survivor, because that was the other part that I didn't have, is when I went to certain people, they actually said, don't listen to her. She's just talking shit about her husband. No, I'm telling you. And when you have someone who doesn't believe you and you're the one behind the scenes, it's hard. And then you don't want to speak up, but push, keep having your voice heard. Let your spouse know. They're going to also say, I don't need any help. Well, more than likely they do.
Yeah.
Just start pushing and actually allow those spouses who've been through it and they're veterans who are in that right place to provide that help and guidance for them to get the help.
Right. That's great advice. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much for sharing everything that you shared. Your story is an amazing story, and you are a survivor in so many ways.
Well, thank you.
Really amazing. And you're doing great work. I just commend you on your organization, SOS. And it sounds like you're doing a great job and in such a needed space. So thank you, Brandi, for coming on and sharing your incredible story. And before you can go, how can people find and connect with you? And how can they find out more information about Shadows of Strength?
Yes, so we have our website, shadowsofstrength.org. And we also have a Facebook, which is under Shadows of Strength. We are, like I said, we've been doing this for just over a year, so we are working on some other social media aspects. You can also email us at info@shadowsofstrength.org. So those are the three ways right now that you can reach out to us and also find out a little bit more about what we do.
Okay, great. Great. Yeah, I've kind of taken a look at your website. There's a lot of information on there. So great job on that.
We're building
Um,
more on it. We're going to start putting out educational pieces. So, like I said, it's a
that's great.
year in making.
Yeah. Well, you're well on your way.
Thank you.
Brandi, thank you so much for coming on. It was great to talk to you. And thank you for being willing to share your story.
Thank you.
Take care. Hello, viewers and listeners. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Tactical Treasures podcast. We have just finished up a very compelling conversation with Brandi Mitchell, who is a U.S. Air Force MilSpouse with her husband, having served for 22 years. And for a combined 12 years, Brandi served as a special agent with the National Background Investigations Bureau. Her and her husband co-founded Shadows of Strength, which is a veteran-based 501c3 nonprofit combating human trafficking by bringing highly skilled counterintelligence to the forefront of the operation. Shadows of Strength has a diversity of programs to combat trafficking, ranging from counterintelligence, an investigative approach, and intelligence gathering efforts, which are focused on the idea that survivors and witnesses, especially those underage, come first, and the need to just listen and believe them is what is most important. To learn more about Shadows of Strength and the effort against human trafficking, go to shadowsofstrength.org. Again, thank you for joining us for this exciting episode of Tactical Treasures podcast. You can find our Tactical Treasures podcast on all your favorite streaming platforms, as well as Vet TV. We are now airing on Reese Across America Radio on Wednesdays at 10 p.m. Eastern. And if you missed that episode, please join us for an encore on Saturdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. You can also find Reese Across America Radio on the iHeartRadio app, the Odyssey app, and the TuneIn app. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again on another podcast. Bye-bye now.